I say we dive right in, and I'll let people in as they join late. Don't worry, David. Don't you don't have to pay any attention to that stuff.
Oh, no worries. Okay. I assume you can see my screen. Move this stuff out of the way. Everybody see my screen okay?
Yep.
I figured I would start with small and grow into everything Windows because this was just a couple things that I saw very early this morning in the Cribl community and saw them for a couple different users, and I put it all into one little pipeline function. And what it was basically is the user has raw, which is ASCII string, and they said we want to basically rename without having to do 1,000 renames because they weren't always sure what the field names would be, every first letter of every word and shorten things, but if it has something after the word count, then keep that word. So I introduced him to the first piece is everybody assumes just because you can hit this little plus that these are all fields. Well, they are, but they're also regexable as an ASCII string. So the first thing that you should do, and you could do this with parser as well, is parse raw. And so once I turn this on and hit save, the A turns into an object. And now you can reference things like raw.fieldName. So that's a very important thing to note. And before I finish to the next function, the other user in the community said, how can I count the number of fields that exist in raw? Well, once you parse raw and it's an object, it's a simple object dot keys, meaning the names of the fields in that exist within raw, and using dot length will give me a count, as you see here, of the total number of fields in raw. Now let's move to the goodness of the rename. So the rename is cool, but a lot of people get stuck right here. They look at it and they go, aha, I'm just going to add a field and X is now Y. And you could spend forever doing that if you have a lot of complex field names in a very large event. What I've done is used a renaming expression, and it starts with name, the field name, dot replace. And going through a regex with the customer, you kind of see what I'm doing here is I basically have a lot of capture groups. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 capture groups, hence these little references to them right here. What I said is for the first letter, it has to be a capital, then something, up to the next capital letter, A through Z, and it continues down this path until I hit the word count, and then nothing else really matters. And when I do that, because this is capture group 1, this is capture group 3, this is 5, and this is 7, you can literally see I'm saying, you know what? Ignore everything in between that. Just put back what I caught, the first letter of every word in those names. And so what you end up with is if you take a look over here on the right, these very long fieldings. By the way, before I do this, looking at this, this is the event. And just with parsing, I've reduced the event by 16%. When I turn this on right here and hit save, you can see here the field names have been renamed, and it concludes with the final word in that field name. And the best thing is a lot of people don't know this, but yeah, you actually get charged for field names. And when they're long, and they can be very long, you can save a lot of money by doing a rename expression and globally addressing every field a name inside of a field as an object and reduce your space by a lot. And I just wanted to quickly show this cool. It's in the actual general channel for the community. I pasted it early this morning, like 6 a.m. Central Time. So just wanted you to know that that's there, and I'm happy to provide this to Rachel, and she can distribute it to the other channels later if you like. Are there any questions on that?
So
okay.
This assumes you're not going to have any name collisions.
Right. Right.
So
yeah, you wouldn't want. You would end up with. You would probably end up with, and I haven't tested it, but a great question is an array. You'd actually see like the same field name with 2 references to 2 different values right here as a guess. I'd have to test it, but very good question. And you can accommodate that as well. if you just keep practicing with the regex and come up with different approaches. But this was just a quick example because that's what the customer asked for. And then the other customer asked for the count. And so I wanted to show you guys those capabilities. All right, let's move on. Any other questions? Okay. Let's move on to the next one. So yeah, I said I promised I was going to talk about XML events today, but we're going to cover classic events, SQL Server events, and XML events as a bonus because it was fun. I was working with a customer, and I have, for the safety of everybody understanding this, replaced all things and made sure that these events are super clean for our test today. But a Windows classic event, I mean, I don't know what drugs these people were on when they created these events. I mean, but clearly you can see here's the thing, looking at this, it starts out okay with key equals value. Splunk loves that, but then it moves past that and goes into key : value. So you're parsing, you can't just say do delimited and set a colon because then it's going to fail on other things. Then it moves into an object name and then a statement where it has a SQL statement with a lot of fun things in there. And then depending upon the event, some additional information, user-defined fields. So when I look at events, and this is important, I tend to first look at an event outside of any product because I want to see it. I want to see it because there's things that are hidden inside the event that you might not be aware of. Lots of carriage returns and new lines and tabs. They're invisible unless you stringify, which we'll cover in a different session, the event, and really discover these magical, wonderful fields and other things that might be hidden when you don't see them in a UI. So I just wanted to make sure you saw that. So I do look at it first. And then I said, you know what, since I talked about this in phases, that it's broken up 4 ways, yeah, well, I'm going to start out with a regular expression. And this regular expression simply captures things through the event and breaks it into 4 fields. So the first thing is break that apart into the 4 phases of the event. And I'm going to keep it at this because of the screen real estate here. So we see now we have the equal signs, we have the colon signs, and you see the select statement below there. In the next event, I go through a lot of regex replacement. This is how I do regex replacement within an eval. I was going to break these up into individual evals, but I had to have like 20 pipeline functions, and you can do that as well. It's your choice, but I'm basically saying like, remove any messy fields and extra new lines and things like that in step 1. And the same thing in step 2, trim off white space in step 3 because it had extra white space at the end of those, and so on and so forth. So I just iterate through them one at a time until it's in the format that I like. And so when I turn this on and it's saved, you'll see a pretty big difference here is now step 1 is a little bit cleaner. This equals that, right down through all of that. Step 2 has been converted to, again, key equals value. Step 3 is cleaner because now I've gotten rid of all those new lines, carriage returns, tabs, and made it very clean. And then, of course, step 4 didn't have really anything in there, but depends on the event. I just have one event for this exercise, but in others, it did have values in there. And then because I have key value, I can go back to the traditional parser. And in the first one, I'm literally saying just parse from step 1 into top level fields. So we turn that on. And because step 2 also has key value fields, same thing, extract key value fields into top level fields. So we're going to turn that on at the same time. And we'll save that. So now we see some magic happening here. Below time, we see all these top level fields. I haven't talked about step 3 and step 4 yet, but I knew from a conversation with the customer that step 3, they wanted to be statement, and step 4 was additional information. So I just did a traditional rename from one field name to another. And that's all that does. Save that. And then remove unnecessary fields. Now, in my world, when I work and it's not customer facing, just so you know, my steps, I usually prefix them with _, because then I don't have to remove them because __ field names just stay within logstream. But in this scenario, because this was something customer facing and office hours facing, I wanted to at least show them right here at below my event. So we're going to hit save, and then these step fields are going to disappear, looking a little cleaner each way that I go through this, and then serialize. Now, what I do love about serialize, this is important, and I did update the serialize function in our docs last week with the help of Michael. Basically, all negatives are processed before the include, the positives. So it's deny and then allow. So a lot of times I do this with different complex projects because sometimes customers will say things like, you can't name the specific field you're serialized. You might never know what it is. I'm like, well, then I can exclude everything but that and then include everything else, and that will address the problem. And you might run into that in the future. So we'll save that. And basically, we're just putting things back into raw. So now we can see raw actually looks really clean. It's a top level JSON ASCII string again, ready for Splunk. The statement is clean. The user defined event data, everything is alphabetized because that's what we did when we serialized the event. And the customer was nuancing. They were going back and forth. Do I want a key value? Key value will be a little bit smaller than JSON because I know you're seeing it this way, but be aware that this is how you're seeing it inside the UI. You can literally still see extra carriage returns here. I could clean those out as well. But also be aware of this. This is nice. In the table, this is a trick. Not everybody knows this here. You can see there's a lot of stuff here, but you can be very specific. Select none and pick one field. And then you can actually see what the event looks like and see those extra carriage returns right here as an example. I do this quite a bit as I'm reviewing the events. Now let's keep going. The customer said, I want to sample the event. And what they said is they wanted to name, and this is in our docs as well, this was the example, combining the values of 4 unique fields: server instance name, session ID, statement, and success. And the reason why he wanted to see that was dramatic reduction. And since I have one event here, I can't really show that, so I can leave this off. But remember, sometimes we talk about reduction. We talk about it like, oh, I got 30% reduction. But there are a lot of performance monitoring agents out there, database monitoring agents, heartbeat agents out there, and those are sending just countless events that mean nothing. They're very redundant. Every minute across 100,000 servers, they're sending this event in. And what they could do is they could sample them, dynamic sampling. And I always start with sampling because if it works in sampling, I don't have to think about time. It's easy to look at inside my static sample that I have in front of me. And then if it works there, I can move it into, I'm also going to sample and use time with a number of events within that time and a size and things like that. But I usually start with sampling and then move there when I need to. But yeah, sampling is built into this as well. Adding an index name, that's not important for this exercise, but I'll add it. And then last piece is, depending upon what you're used to, remember, the nice thing about these types of events is because you extracted the events to top level fields, those become ready for key stats. They are available inside of your data analytics store for searching. You don't have to push everything back to raw if you've successfully extracted them. But this was what the customer said they were wanting, is an event that looked exactly like this, which, you know, there wasn't a huge amount of savings right here within the event. He said he will look at the event and make decisions on what fields using parse that they could have removed. Right up here in the parsing expression, they could have used fields filter expression to say when things equal 0, don't include them when they serialize them later. They would just disappear. But he wasn't ready for that. But in his world, when we were sampling on his thousands of events that we sampled, he had a 70% reduction of the total number of events, not within the event, because we didn't reduce the event that much. But when we used his sample, that was where he saw the huge reduction savings. Don't be afraid of sampling. I know we kind of focus a lot on looking inside the event, reducing the event, rewriting the event, but also remember, there's a lot of redundancy in this universe. I mean, we are getting trusted zone information. A lot of times we're getting the same event repeated itself every minute across thousands of servers. Those types of things could be easily sampled without impacting any value of the data. And the last thing is remove. So that's it. I just thought you would want to see how I go about my thought process for approaching ridiculously ugly, insane events that start very messy and they end very pretty. Any questions about Windows SQL Server events and what I've done here today? Okay.
Actually, I have a question. My
Yeah.
name's Scott. So, I mean, this is as much about Splunk as it is about Cribl, but I'm curious on the comparison. So if I understood this right, those fields became index fields within Splunk, available for T-stats.
Yes.
Okay, so I guess what I'm weighing as I go down this path is what's the hit on the indexer for adding those fields as T-stats fields versus, say, a data model? And I don't know if this is the right place to ask that question, or because you always hear, don't overdo it with the index fields, right? That's what Splunk tells you. So I'm just curious on what your take is on that.
Great question. Just an FYI, a little history on me. I was at Splunk for 10 years before coming here. So I was there in the beginning when they said things like schema on the fly and, regex, extract at search time. There's a hit that you take on that because every time runs a search, you're having to search against the big analytics store, against all time, pull those things out dynamically. But then came, 4 years later, enterprise security. And it was originally really slow. In fact, you couldn't really index very much data per indexer because it was so slow. So then they added data models. And with data models, what it meant, of course, was T-stats. It meant that, I'm building this dedicated columnar store of data, metadata, extracted fields that are easy to search. They're instantaneous because the schema is already created. Kind of counterintuitive to what Splunk originally said, schema on the fly. Now it is schema on write, in a sense. But they had to write it. So you have a double penalty. You index. That's the first penalty that we get. But if I can provide the data hooked, the events already timestamp broken with all the extracted fields, with everything ready to go and send it to the indexing tier, the indexers immediately recognize that and go, wow, I don't have to do time. I don't have to do event breaking. In fact, you're giving me everything I need to write out everything data model compliant, data model ready, common information model ready immediately. So when you look at it and you evaluate your common information models, you look at your data models and you say, have I mapped the perfect field extractions to the common information model? And if you haven't, rename them, do things like that. Then you can go down the next step, which is, wow, I can turn off data model acceleration. You don't need it anymore because that's, in a sense, what's happening behind the scenes, the triple penalty. 1, you indexed. 2, you build a data model. 3, you rerun data model acceleration every 5 to 15 minutes. And to conclude with that, of course, because people say, what about storage? You've increased storage by having metafields. Yes, you've increased storage, but guess what? So is your data model. That is exactly what enterprise security is doing. That is what those data models do. So you don't really impact anything. You actually improve efficiencies. You're reducing your event size, number one. You're alleviating a lot of performance hits to your indexing tier because they're not building data models, they're not accelerating data, they're not event breaking, they're not doing all of that work anymore. Everything is going to become faster because the extracted fields exist everywhere. So when you do that, you're actually benefiting Splunk, you're benefiting the user experience. It's a one-to-one wash as far as storage goes, but underscore raw, of course, is reduced, which is a benefit to your license. Does that answer your question?
It does. Excellent. That's exactly the stuff I wanted. I appreciate it.
You bet. All right, moving forward a little bit. Now, this is the way I went about attacking this one. And usually, this was yesterday, 9 at night, I think. The customer gave me the problem and I needed to get it to him today. This was pass 1, I call it. I usually think about it and then I go, let me try a different way. And so when I originally approached classic events, it was really interesting. This is another example, and you can see I have 15 steps to do, in a sense, what I did by combining many things into one eval. And the reason why I created a classic events pipeline is because I wanted to step people through the same process where I'm not confusing them with 35 evals all inside one eval function. But I'm going to turn these all on, and I'm going to save it because we'll turn this event into something different, assuming that I have it working correctly. Of course I don't. I have no idea what I'm doing here. Oh, I think I know why. That's right. There we go. Save. So in this one, again, maybe I don't have it working. Who knows? Let's see. Maybe not. I might skip past this. But one of the things that I did on this one, I'm not quite sure why that's not working anymore. Let's try that again. Simple. Out. Oh, there it goes. I don't know why that wasn't doing that. So I wanted to show a couple things. One, I told the customer, and it's kind of a bad example in this one, is if we were to rewrite raw without the message field, which can be pretty huge, we could save a huge amount, but you don't have to keep message in raw because it's just a big paragraph of text. You could rewrite raw with just the Windows specific key value JSON, however you want to put it, into raw and put message as an extracted field, and that will dramatically reduce the license. And in this scenario, when I did it this way, I'll have to look at what I changed before our demo today. It was an 80% reduction in the event size just by moving message out of raw, just as a common scenario that might help. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? Okay. Well,
David, could you conceivably
there we go.
leave the message fields for like a lookup table just to be appended at search time so that you're saving both on license and storage?
Could I move message to a lookup table? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I mean, the idea being to save on not only license, but also storage. So you're not just moving it out of raw into a key value pair that still has to be stored on Splunk.
Yeah, I believe that you could do a lot of that because, yeah, this is something that, you know, clearly would appear in every single event. And that would be another area that you could attack. But yeah, you see that this is a very large event, 87% reduction of the event when I didn't put message back into raw right here. That's what you're seeing right here. When I put raw back in with the message, assuming that I didn't break this earlier. Yeah, there it is. You can see the dramatic difference, 7% reduction. So just know these little tips and tricks, because when you present this argument to your security team, because, oh, we need message. It's like, well, you have message. It's just an extracted field. Oh, but I need the original event unmodified. It's like, all right, I tell you what, let's make an agreement because Logstream supports multiple destinations. I'll send the original untouched event into S3, whether that's in AWS S3 or local cheap storage that's S3 supported, your choice, but you'll have access through our replay option to pull the event back on the fly anytime you want. So just giving you different options to think about when you use the product. Now the last one, XML events.
I had a question slash observation on this. So if you're putting all this into indexed fields, if you run TSIDX reduction, you're going to not have this anymore if it's not in raw.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, you would have to be aware of that and understand your retention periods and things like that. Absolutely.
Okay.
But again, that's why we send things to S3. And let's look at some recent articles that came out a week ago. Was that, and this isn't me that wrote this, I'm not making this up. It said 97% of all searches are over the past 24 hours of data. So why wouldn't we all say, hey, purchasing guy that spends all the money on storage, we could, you know, eliminate the need to continue to buy the petabytes of storage that we do to keep the data for 2 years because it sits in S3 in cheapest storage. And we could reduce our retention window to 30 days, let's say, something like that, something that still falls within the realm of what ES would support. And we don't always think about it, but we talked about it, extracted fields. We've increased the performance. Everybody's happier. All the search results are better. ES is functioning. It's so much faster. Everybody's just enjoying the experience because the noise is gone with sampling, things like that. And at a glance, because things exist within the S3 environment, you can, when you write to S3 and you use something known as partition expressions, you can choose to write out the path such that you could say the path we've written as index, host, source type, user, department, namespace, whatever that is, such that if the security team needs it, and let's not forget that you can mount S3 as a file system, you can use CyberDuck, you can use transport, you can use an FTP tool, and the security team doesn't have to log in to Logstream or log into S3 and download buckets. They can literally run a search, if you will, even on replay within our collector today. No, not talking about like a data analytics store search. What I'm basically saying is we triggered a security event. Phantom says we need to pull back in data for 2 years based on this user that triggered that event. I'll run a replay automatically and have all the worker nodes send the data back into this other place. Maybe it's Splunk, maybe it's Elastic, I don't care. But when you do the replay, there's a filter there. So you have the choice, even in our UI, when you select data collectors and rerun your source, you can say source type equals Palo Alto, department equals XYZ, and preview that data and see it. It's kind of like a slow search, but the idea is, you know, investigations don't happen every moment of the day where you're having to pull back a year's worth of data. To have that level of flexibility and control, be able to pull the data back and test it before you pull it back in, or even if you're not using Logstream, be able to look at the entire file system of your S3 buckets live through another product, a file system, a mounted drive, S3FS, gives you tremendous flexibility that I'm not sure we're having all the conversations we always need to have, because security is very expensive. And if we can do everything we can to make their experience easier, give them a little more control, help them understand that they can see the data all the time, 10 years ago, even if it's sitting in the buckets, you're not going to be restricted, or you don't have to wait for a ticket. You don't have to wait for me to pull the data back in. If you need it immediately, just click on CyberDuck, click on transport, click on a file system on a server somewhere that has a map drive that's mounted the S3 store into a file system, and you can see that data instantly. So just, you know, if you didn't know about it, it's worthwhile conversation. We're happy to talk with you offline about that. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, and that is something we're realizing. It doesn't have to be pulled back into Splunk if it's on S3 or something like that.
Perfect.
But it's just realizing that, right, any current usage might be
Right.
affected.
Very good point.
Because of TSID expedition. So, okay, thank you.
So the last one was what I put the use case together, and I just built a sandbox. We have a new sandbox coming for this one. I'm going to build ones for these other 3 use cases that I showed today. So those are coming soon. But when I looked at this event, you know, this is Windows XML reduction and conversion from XML to JSON. But before I do that, I talked about it. When you open up an event, you might see a lot of strange things, tabs and new lines and carriage returns. So the very first thing I did for this event before I do any conversion is remove those, replace those. And that takes the event down a notch, you know, 5% in this case, but it was quick. It was easy. And again, it's just saying do against raw, the ASCII string of raw, replace squiggle braces and a tab globally, multi-line with nothing. Do the same thing with new lines and returns, one or the other, any number of them. Same exact thing, but this time, put a comma between them because you want to comma delimit the things within the event. So, but the next one is the new function. And, you know, I can't promise it, but I hope in the very near future that will just become part of the parsing function as we continue to evolve the product. But this is it. Basically, we have a miscellaneous, a c.text function that as you type it, what you're going to see is we also support like parsing XML. So it doesn't have to be a Windows event. As you start to type c.text.parse, you'll see XML as well. But we did a little more work with Windows events such that the very first thing is if you chose to just do this, what it's basically saying is I'm going to remove all of the fields where value is dash, because Windows does a lot of that. So that's the default behavior. And I hit save, and what's going to happen, it's pretty magical when I turn it on, by the way. How many of us have done that, right? Is now raw becomes JSON. It's, again, these are the field names you pay for. That's why JSON costs more than key value. The length, raw.event, data, privilege list. It's a long field name. When I did that, it has removed the dashed field, but let's assume zeros aren't important to me either. So when you add that back in here, what I said is, you know what, just to show for an example, I'm going to remove 0 by 0 and zeros from the event just because it's an example. Save that. And then anything with a 0 would go away. But you can see, I want to show you this. This is important. Anyone know, this is the trivia quiz, why this 0 does not get removed, even though I specified 0 right there? Pop quiz. If you don't know, it's because 0 is an ASCII string. So let me move that extra comma. 0 is an ASCII string. So save. And then the zeros go away. Just wanted to make sure you saw that, because you have to look to the left and identify what you're working with. Otherwise, you have to quote them, and then they're strings. All right. So far, the event, 28% reduction of this event. And then I go a little crazy. I go, I don't love JSON, but you know, I saw minor things like some white space in one long field. And this is what I'm talking about. That's the number of bytes you pay for with your license. Take care to curate your field names. Next thing, flatten. Love this. Sometimes it's hard to deal with fields that are nested to this level. Sometimes when you have an array that you accidentally created and you sent it to Splunk and realized when you did your GeoIP enrichment and you didn't flatten your field, nothing showed up in Splunk because it was an array, a nested object. Flattening takes care of that, and you have an option with Splunk as a destination. I'll show you what that does in a moment, to be able to say, you know what, I'll flatten nested objects before they're sent to Splunk at the destination. Feel free to look at that on your own under data destination Splunk. But now here it is. I flattened up to 5 levels deep all of the fields that existed in raw. Raw is crossed out temporarily, no big deal. We're going to put it back. But I don't love this. This is where I need to think about conservation. So there's my rename again. Now, what I said is I have raw underscore event underscore some word, which this basically matches all of this up to the very last underscore. Get rid of it. That's all I said, is just take this and make it go away. Clean up my field names globally. Boom, they're gone. Now they're nice and clean. The next one is serialize, writing things back to raw. Again, excluding things and including things back to raw, turning it on, saving it. And now we have the best of both worlds. We have raw, which is easy to look at. It's still JSON. It's extracted fields below for the purposes of a common information model for enterprise security. But some people might say, you know, I'm a key value guy because Splunk showed me that in the beginning, that it's awesome. Fine, it's now key value. The beautiful thing is the event size has been reduced. And depending upon the event, sometimes it's 60%, sometimes it's 70%, it just depends. The last piece, again, it's optional, is, you know what, maybe I don't need T-stats. Maybe I don't care about extracted fields. Depends. I think they're important. I use them all the time, but I do have customers that say, this is how I want things to be. And you have to also think of another thing. Splunk did not write 2,000 apps. They wrote, 50 or 60 apps, whatever they've written. And those dashboards that exist, most of them are written in the old principle of things exist within raw, and the field names that you changed might break those dashboards. Be aware of that. It's okay. It's okay to fix things and even build. Once you have the fields, maybe you are keeping them as an example. It is easier for me to build a dashboard with this, and the dashboards will run lightning fast when I use extracted fields over looking inside raw and trying to parse out whether it's key value or whether it's JSON, it's easier for Splunk to handle the extracted fields and performance matters than it is to deal with things within raw. But be conscious of what you're actually doing so that you don't accidentally impact another app. And again, what I usually do when a customer is looking at things like enterprise security is I'll look at the common information model. I'll look at the data model. I'll see the things that were done, the coalesce, the rename, the calculated fields. Those are the kinds of things we can do very easily inside of our product and send those already done right to enterprise security if you just review the information in the end point, whatever that might be. It could be Splunk, could be something else. So that is my quick review today, but since we have about 19 minutes left, I'm going to show you one more I thought would be really cool. I think I called it magic because it was magic. All right, magic, there we go. All right. So for Beats agents, this was from an ISP. They don't use Splunk. In this case, they use Elastic. So the customer's challenge was that as the event comes in, there's multi-measure, multi-value metrics that exist buried deeply. You see them right here. There is a measure, one, value, another measure, and the way his metric store was set up, he needed to be able to say that for every event that comes in, sometimes it's system load, but again, there's a bazillion events here. Sometimes it might be system CPU. And again, there's 1,000 of these. There's so many. There's no way you could actually manually address this and get it right. So I'm going to show you how I solved the problem for him, because he said the only way you can do this is with code. I'll write a custom function. Of course, say that to me. I'm like, no, don't say that to me. I'm going to figure this out. And it was a lot of fun. And I failed many times before I figured out a new approach. And I say the word exclusion because it really is cool. So the first thing that we needed to do with this is I measured the time. By the way, this is a neat trick. I wanted to see how long it takes to do a start time, evaluate date now. That's how you create a timestamp to measure the milliseconds it takes. And at the very bottom, I'll have, just so you can see it, an end time and then a duration. And we can review that later, but I wanted you to see that I'm doing that as well. He doesn't use _raw because Elastic, he doesn't need it. So Elastic means bye-bye raw, it's gone. Didn't matter because as events flowed in through Logstream, those came in already extracted because we do that out of the box. Flatten, my favorite thing. So boom, everything is now flat. Lots of goodness here. Now here's what happened to those multi-measure. It just came up with a key _1, key _15. There's no way to know what these numbers will be. So we go through the next thing, and this was simple. He just says, hey, can you just rename event data set, to data set? I'm like, sure, no big deal there. Then we take, this is a really cool thing. I did exclusion again. You can clearly see that. Again, I know what fields that are static. He told me them. But what I don't know is everything else per event, like system CPU, and it goes on and
Dave
on.
or just me?
Sorry, what was that? Okay.
I think Mo accidentally unmuted.
All right. So I said, you know what? If I know all the things that I'm not supposed to work with, the only one I'm actually going to work with is everything else. It's important because when you watch what I'm going to do, I'm going to throw this into a field called metric. And it's key value for a reason. So take a look. Once I do that, we're going to see metric is now key, weird key name, equals value, and a space. Now I can work with it. Now I have a lot more power. So this is unroll. Unroll is amazing. So when I see this specific event like this, I need this to be split into however many key value pairs exist within this one field. I'm going to unroll it, meaning that if there's 10 key values here, it's going to become 10 events. We see we have 10 events here. I said, and you can use anything here, and it could have been a new line, it could have been a comma, it could have been a colon, however you've separated your fields here, this is a space. When I turn this on, the unroll is going to take this key. Look, it's just one field now. And if I go down, metric, this is the second key value. And take a look here. I took 10 events. They're now 124 events in this example. It doesn't matter because his goal was now every single event has a key and a value, with everything else being some dimension that he's going to split by within a metrics analytics store of choice. But we're not done yet, because when I have metric, this is still has to be reduced further to a metric and a value. So I did a match, which is the first or second, I should say. I should probably move this to look like this in a sense. I have a metric at 0 and a value. So what I'm basically saying is go look for the digits and then go look for everything else that's precedes the equal sign and hit save. Take a look at what metric and value becomes now. So once I do this and turn this on, sorry, metric has been set to just system load 5. Value is now 5. That's what he needed. So once I do that, I can finish with some rename cleanup, which is what he asked me to do. And what he said is he does not want underscores. He uses a hierarchical metric naming schema because it puts folders into the metric store. So we basically put periods back into the event name, the field name. Then, of course, my measurement of the duration. He just wanted to see how long this event takes to process. And we end up with a duration field. It took 5 milliseconds to process this event. And then we were done. The one thing as a nuance that people may not know about is right here. If you ever want to play, not enough time for this today because we're going to leave time for Q&A, is we do have a profile. And a profile is really cool, assuming my laptop doesn't explode here because I hear my fan with Docker running behind the scenes. But it actually does like a really, really amazing version of what I say is the job inspector, which lays out every aspect of how long it took in total to run every single event, gives you bottom-up calculations, a call tree, an event log. Everything is measured, and it's a beautiful way to look at how your functions are being played out and worked on across the logs in the stream. So feel free to explore that at your leisure. So that's my session today, and I figured I would give us time for some Q&A based on this craziness that I just threw out there. But let's open it up. Questions, comments, anything?
Oh, the silence is deafening.
I thought this one would really get a lot of Q&A because I thought this was a lot of fun, because you don't often see people using Unroll and doing this, taking this approach this way I did, which is solving the problem by using exclusion instead of inclusion.
Well, maybe people's minds are too blown and they need to go away and play with this for a bit.
And be clear, I don't love the mess. So when I do look at things, by the way, I do tend to turn this off because I just want to say, look at my super clean event. Look how wonderful that looks. I have a metric and I have a value. And so if you haven't played with that, just know that that exists as well. The turning off diff.
Cool.
This is awesome, Dave. It's extreme case, but it's awesome. Do you have anything handy to show us around the Java debug logs processing?
I don't, but I believe I know someone on our call who does. And I think he knows who I'm talking about regarding stack traces. Brendan, do you have anything handy?
Yeah, my ears are burning here. Let me see what I can pull up for you guys.
This was just a topic Brendan covered just like yesterday. So very good question, good timing. And
a couple days ago. Yeah, so the backstory here is, working with customer on Java stack trace logs and their serverless functions. So, as I don't think there's anything sensitive in this here that's customer related.
Sorry, I threw this on you, like literally.
There it is. No, all good.
Yeah.
Let me just verify really quick.
All right.
Yeah, so I was working with a customer, and they've got Java running in the back end for their line of business application. And unfortunately, as you can tell from this example here, nobody decided to standardize on the naming convention for where their stack trace exceptions were going. This is only a small subset of what we found. There's about 20 more of these in here. So if you think about a Java stack trace, you start reading from the bottom up, and that's the function execution. So where was the jar initialized? What called to start the jar, and then each of the preceding lines in the stack trace to the top is successive function calls. So really, there's two things that are extremely important in a stack trace: the first line and the second line, and that's it. What method called the exception, and then what was the exception. So with this, we're trimming out, I think, on magnitude of about 70% of those logs by just removing the remaining lines. Some of these stack traces are hundreds of lines long. So if you look at this, we're literally saying, take the field, in this case, the message exception stack trace, do the split function on it. So we're splitting by the new line, which then returns an array. And we take the 0th index, which is the first line, so we get the exception, and then we do the same exact thing for the second line, the first index, and then we run it through the trim function because there's some white space at the beginning of the line. So additional savings too on that. So, and then drop the stack trace from the original message. So yeah, nice cleanup here, but I wanted to concatenate all of these together and basically say, take the first stack trace that you find. We ran into some issues here, so we had to build it out into separate eval functions, but this ended up working, copy paste the function in the pipeline. So yeah, pretty cool way to clean up Java stack traces.
And I like your approach because it reminds me of what I had done with the 0, the first value and the second value, and the trim of the white space. And I really appreciate we were following the same type of thought process in the cleanup. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. I think unless anybody has anything else they want to talk about, ask questions about, we might be done for the day. A little early.
Thanks, everybody. I really appreciated getting the opportunity to talk with everybody and show off some fun Windows reduction principles and talk about T-stats a lot. And I look forward to working with you guys in the community soon.
I think this is going to be a popular recording.
Yeah, amazing stuff, David. So much stuff in 1 hour.
Thanks. I'll see you all in a couple weeks.
Bye, everyone.
Ciao.